how do you find meaning when your body just gives out on you? And what if an illness wasn't actually a curse, but a kind of calling? We're going to get right into that today because we're exploring this really profound story from over 700 years ago about a woman who found a sacred purpose in her own suffering. So our source for this incredible story is something called hagiography, which is basically a biography of a saint written way back in the 13th century. This isn't some modern take or reinterpretation. We're looking at the actual words and beliefs from that time, which, makes it all the more powerful. You gotta remember, back then, these weren't just stories. They were like spiritual guidebooks, teaching people how to live, how to face death, and how to find God even in the toughest situations.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to follow her journey in 5 parts. We'll start with her life of incredible devotion, and then we'll see her face the test of a sudden illness. We'll look at the spiritual fear that gripped her community, then dive into the amazing revelation she had about suffering's true purpose, and finally, how she embraced a totally new and sacred mission.
Okay, let's begin with the woman herself. Picture this. We're in a convent in the 1200s, and the person in charge, the abbess, has dedicated pretty much her entire life to her faith and to taking care of her community.
I mean, just let that number sink in. For over 40 years, this abbess ran her convent. That's not a job, that's her entire life. A complete marathon of piety, of charity, and leadership. This really sets the stage for how deeply committed she was.
And she was, by all accounts, just an amazing leader. The text says she had great wisdom and sweetness. She wasn't some distant figurehead, no. She was hands-on, personally caring for her sisters, comforting them when they needed it. She was just this pillar of love and virtue for her whole community, the absolute bedrock.
But after 4 decades of this steady, devoted life, everything is about to get turned completely upside down. This is where her real test begins.
Just like that. No warning. After a lifetime of being the strong one, she collapses. The life she knew, the work she did so faithfully, it all just grinds to a halt.
So the text calls her illness the little apoplexy, which was likely some kind of stroke. But look at that second part. This is where it gets really fascinating. The author immediately reframes it. It's not just a medical problem, it's a favorable touch of the almighty hand. Wow. That one line is the key to this whole story. Think about it. In an age where faith was all about big, visible actions, building cathedrals, going on crusades, this idea was totally radical. It suggested that the deepest spiritual journey could be an internal one. Now, her illness doesn't just impact her. It sends these massive shockwaves through the convent, and it triggers this huge spiritual crisis for the very people she was leading. And this shows you the huge gap that was forming. Her community, the nuns who absolutely adored her, they prayed for the obvious thing. They wanted her healed, they wanted her back. But the abbess, in the middle of all her pain, was starting to find a totally different kind of prayer. In the text, God says she conforms herself in all things to my will. She's not fighting it anymore, she's starting to listen to it. And you've really got to understand this part. The nuns' biggest fear wasn't just that their beloved abbess would die. Their terror was that all this pain, this suffering, would completely shatter her faith. That their guiding star would be so broken that she would just stray from the path. They were literally afraid for her soul. So just as her community is spiraling into this fear, the abbess herself has this huge turning point. She gets a revelation that completely changes the meaning of everything she's going through. So according to the text, she starts having these divine communications. What does that mean? Well, essentially, she's getting these insights directly from God that tell her this illness isn't some random tragedy. It's not a punishment. It's actually a very specific, almost privileged path to getting closer to God. And this right here is the heart of her revelation. She learns that God is actually more pleased by these internal struggles, by her patient endurance, by her uniting with his will, than by all the physical things she used to do. This was a massive theological statement back then. It meant that internal, patient suffering was more valuable than all the external acts of piety that defined the era. Her sickness wasn't a failure to serve. It was a promotion to a higher kind of service. The text gives us this really beautiful metaphor. So, imagine a queen, and her job is to bring beautiful ornaments to her king. God is the king, the abbess is the queen, and those ornaments are all her normal duties.
The text says the king doesn't care if she can't bring the ornaments anymore because he's so much happier that she's just ready to do what he wants, which in this case is to accept her illness as his. So, armed with this totally new understanding, the abbess stops fighting what's happening to her. Instead, she starts to embrace it as a new and maybe even more important job. And you can see her transformation happen in these 3 distinct steps. First, she does the logical thing. She feels like she can't do her job anymore, so she tries to resign. But her request is denied with the message that her current sickness has its own secret purpose. And so, finally, she moves into total acceptance. She embraces her illness as her new way to serve. And this is the mission she's given. These words completely redefine her body. It's no longer a prison of sickness. Instead, it's become a sacred place, a place where that chooses to take his delight. Her sickbed has become a temple. And that's the ultimate transformation, right there. Her suffering went from being this private, awful tragedy to being a public, sacred act of devotion. Her patient endurance became a living lesson for her whole community, a kind of service way more profound than anything she'd done in the 40 years before. And the text leaves us with this final, powerful lesson. It's saying that when sick people pray, the goal isn't only about getting cured. The act of praying itself helps them become more patient and, in the end, to get more abundant and valuable fruit from their illness. That suffering itself can actually be fruitful. So this 700-year-old story leaves us with a pretty challenging question, even for us today. In a world that's so obsessed with fixing things, curing everything, and overcoming all obstacles, it asks us to think about a different kind of strength. Could it be that the greatest power we find in our hardest times doesn't come from fighting to get back what we lost, but from the radical acceptance of what is?